Hey, everybody, we're back. Coon Prairie Ramblers, we're confabulating meandering. We got the circles wagging. The wagon circled.
The circles wagging.
We got Casey and Luke and Melman, and we're going to talk about going back to hard times.
Hard times.
Hard times.
They were so hard that they were before our times.
Hard times in the 1930s, Depression days. I didn't know them well. My mother did.
Days of the Great Dust Bowl.
None of us saw the Great Depression, did we? But we know all the stories.
I read The Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's had to face off with the wrath of grapes a time or two as well.
Oh, he was a drunk.
No, I'm kidding. I just threw that out there. That's a good thing to say when they say Grapes of Wrath. By John
Steinbeck.
Very good. Good. What would happen if we grew up in Depression times?
Well, I know I came from the Midwest. And if I was way back there, if I was back in the 30s, I didn't live in the 30s, but living in the 50s, I had to shovel coal as a little boy.
Got to go further back. Better go back to 30s.
Go back to 30s, yeah.
You got to imagine stuff.
People lived. I don't know if they had gas lines then or not, but in the cities. But everybody had coal. Everybody burnt coal back in those days. And in those days, you would have preparing for winter. You'd order a big coal truck to come to your house and dump a load of coal beside your house. And a lot of people had what they call a coal basement. They had a basement, but the basement was used to store the coal. And they would shovel the coal down through a hole or a window in the basement, and then you'd have somebody down there shoveling the coal over to the corner away from the furnace, and then eventually this whole room would be full of coal, and then on the other side of the room that would be the furnace. And every day somebody had to go down in that room and stoke the furnace with that coal.
And that stoking.
That load of coal would supposedly last you the whole winter. As a little boy, I'd be walking down the street, and some guy just got a big load of coal, and he says, "Hey, you want to earn a few bucks? Probably not a few bucks back then. It was probably a couple quarters or something." He said, "Go down in my basement, and I'm going to shovel the coal down this hole, and you shovel it over." That to me, that was hard times.
Well, we ain't talking about the 50s. We're talking about the 30s.
Yeah, but
they shoveled coal then, too.
But they did then, yeah. It was probably even harder then because I don't know. We had gas.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I mean,
stay away from the furnace
we had gas,
down there when you're shoveling that coal.
We had gas lines that we burnt.
Wait, we're going back. You're coming back
off
up
of
again.
Natural gas.
Let's go back to the 30s.
It's going to be up the next week if you keep going.
Okay.
Can't keep.
Go back to the 30s.
All right.
We're in 1930 in rural Columbus, Ohio.
And they had to shovel coal. They lived off Buckeyes.
Buckeyes.
Not Buckeyes. Not again tonight. Yeah. Buckeye sandwiches and Buckeye soup and Buckeye meatloaf.
I just wonder. I wonder how. But anyway, tell me. What do you think?
Ohio.
Where was you?
Where
if you
was
were
I
in the
in
30s, where would you have been? You would have been in Oklahoma.
I would have been in Nocatee.
Nocatee.
Well, I guess I would have been in Nocatee. It depends on how you look at it, but that's where my family's
life
from.
in Nocatee been in the 30s.
Hard work, working off the land, living off the land.
Yeah. It was poor. It's poor now, but it was poor then too.
Yeah, my father told me that they lived off of what they could produce, cattle, and they didn't have a lot. I mean, they had, I think about 80 acres of land, and what they could feed off, the family off of was, the cattle they had and the hogs and the chickens and they grew a lot of sweet potatoes. And my father said they basically lived off of sweet potatoes. And not only just eating the sweet potatoes, but he said they did eat a lot of sweet potatoes.
Well, they lived healthy.
They took the sweet potatoes down to Fort Myers, traded and bartered. I guess back then they bartered goods.
Oh, yeah.
And they would trade them for flour, and they would trade them for coffee, sugar, different staples, things they had to have. And they would have enough sweet potatoes. And I guess it was like a commodity.
Like a farmer's market or something.
Right. And I don't know exactly where they went to down there.
Stuff.
But they would go down there and take your wagon load of sweet potatoes or Model A or whatever it was they had and get what they needed and come back and grow some more.
You had to live off the land and what you could scratch. I've interviewed people, the old timers at the reunions and stuff about the crepe mill at Nocatee way back in the day, like Depression time, and And they were lucky to earn 10 cents an hour down there to support the family on.
And they worked all day,
All right, that was hard work. They wasn't just laying
so
around.
there wasn't much leisure time.
Wasn't no welfare neither.
You know, I can remember too when I was growing up that my father and my grandfather had numerous potato rakes, and I don't know where they ever went, but I'm
Potato
sure
rakes.
those potato rakes went through the
Oh, yeah.
Depression, because I mean that's how they dug those potatoes up,
Sure did.
was with those potato rakes. I don't know if you're familiar with a potato rake, but it's got longer tines. They're
And they're further
pointed.
apart.
They're further apart, yeah, and they just stick them in the ground and pull it,
That's
pull
right.
that tater out of the
We
ground.
had one coming up. I don't know what would come of it, though, but it could have lived through those times.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. A lot of them did, but
But you're talking in the 30s here at Nocatee, there was still a lot of people that didn't, most of them probably did not have indoor plumbing, and very few had electricity.
and I think that a lot of the people that, like my father, that lived through those times, they were always living in anticipation that was going to happen again.
Yeah,
Or it could
if
very
it
well
happened
happen
once, it could
again.
happen again.
And they were very frugal,
Yeah, they learned to be that way.
and they waste not, want not.
No,
Yeah.
I've heard my aunts
Yeah.
talk about how they would fight over the flour sacks because they came in bright colors with flowers and stuff, and the girls would fight over who was going to get that flour sack to have a dress made out of, which my grandmother would make dresses from.
Yeah, and
they
I
made
read-
their underwear and everything.
Right, and I read an interesting story one time about some company that had the knowledge of people using the flour sacks to make clothing out of, and that's when they started making them with patterns on them.
Right, because
So the people would
otherwise
have-
it said flour on it or something.
Yeah, right. But so they started making them with like flowers.
And that helped. It was a godsend.
Oh,
to,
it was.
to the kids.
Can
and
you
stuff.
imagine that? Stop and think about it.
That's
Stop and think
exactly
about, instead of going up to Walmart and getting you a new shirt, your mama had to
Make it out of
make
flour
it. She
sack.
probably didn't have a pattern. She had to make her own pattern and probably sewed it on one of the little treadmill
Singers.
sewing machines.
The
Yeah, and
trundle or whatever they call that thing on it.
probably
Or
lasted
a
forever.
foot
Though.
pedal, but people they had to scratch for a living. I mean, you had people that they had to go hunt or they had to fish. They didn't eat. I've
And
had
that's-
people living off garfish and guavas.
My father always had an expression he used to use, and it was root hog or die poor.
In Nocatee, back in those days, when I married my wife, her parents didn't have heat or air conditioning in their house.
Right.
So,
And
that
you-
was like
you
in the
introduced
mid-
them to air
the
conditioning.
mid-90s. So evidently back in the set 30s at Nocatee, they didn't have heat in their houses.
No,
I
you
never
had-
had air conditioning until
No, you
I
had-
graduated from school.
We didn't have it.
I didn't have it. We lived without. I didn't. I mean, that was something. I don't even remember watching. Well, I saw them. We never had a color TV in our house until the mid '60s, somewhere while I was in high
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I even saw one until the mid-60s.
And the remote control was me getting up to go change it.
That's right. We had them big double hung windows, ones with the window weights that had
Yeah.
that clank around. You
Yeah.
could pick them up, and we did have screens. Some people didn't have screens
Yeah.
or whatever. And you had that, and you had box fans, them little round fans that you sat on the floor.
But if you had a cold snap in the winter in Nocatee, how'd you get warm?
We
We
had
had
one
gas
little
heaters.
bitty gas heater, and
Yeah.
you dressed by that, and
Yep.
you warmed yourself up
And-
before you went to bed.
Our kitchen, we didn't even have a heater, and Mom would go in there and turn the oven on to about
That's
500 degrees,
exactly
leave the
right.
door open, and you'd come in there and you'd back up to the oven to get warmed up.
Well, back in the old days, they were using pot-bellied stove and all back in the 30s, so
Yeah,
they would have
right.
had to chop wood to stay warm.
And that's what we had at school in Nocatee.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
But we're glad those days are past. We're glad our parents survived them. Otherwise, we would not be here.
And hopefully, we
Tell them.
learned a lesson from them.
Hopefully so. And makes you appreciative of the older generation. We talk about the hard times we remember. But it's
I don't
nothing
think we
compared
even
to
know
theirs.
what hard times are.
We ain't got a clue. But anyway, we're hard running out of time here. So we'll be back for the next segment in just a few. Y'all stick around.